my name is Aaron, book is Engage Every Family, 5 Simple Principles. Steve began his career as a teacher and moved through the ranks to award-winning principal and district superintendent. At the state level, Steve served as the first chief academic officer and was appointed to the acting state superintendent by Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe. Currently, Steve is the Senior Vice President with Living Tree Technology and is also a lecturer at the School of Education of the College of William and Mary, where he teaches at the doctoral program classes for executive organizational leaders and plannings and evaluations. Steve, would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Well, thank you very much, Aaron. I appreciate it. And hello, everyone, and thanks for joining the webinar this afternoon and talking about a topic that, of course, I think is pretty important. But, you know, and as I said to Aaron before we went live, I'm sure you didn't sign up for a webinar to hear my life story. But I'll tell you a little bit about myself and how I got to this point, because it certainly wasn't a grand plan, I can tell you that. Before I move on, I want you to also know that we are going to save some time for questions at the end of the webinar. So if you have a question, if I say something that prompts a question, please, you'll see a question box. Please enter that question box, and we're going to try to leave time at the end and try to get as many of those questions answered as possible. But as Aaron told you, I did start my career as a teacher many years ago and moved through the ranks from pretty traditional, you know, department chair and district director and assistant principal and assistant superintendent and deputy superintendent and all kinds of things. But all of this work in family engagement started during my years as a principal. And it started because I was trying to determine why we couldn't seem to improve our school. We seemed to have plateaued. And we had some issues, quite frankly, like probably many or most schools do. Not all of our students were performing at levels that we had hoped they would. We had probably the pretty typical issues of attendance and behavior. We had a significant free and reduced lunch rate, about 70%. Over 40 different languages were spoken. This was a high school, by the way. And so with all of that came all of the wonderful opportunities to work with children, but all of the challenges that that kind of an organization brought as well. And it really started with a question that I was asked. If you can believe that a question can start all of this, just as I was applying for the job to be the principal of this school, I was asked to have a lunch meeting before the school board voted on my appointment, the superintendent's recommendation. And one of the school board members asked me at that lunch, it told me some, you know, rather unflattering facts about the school, some data that were not overly positive, dropout rates being significantly high and test scores being significantly low, average daily attendance being very, very low, way out of whack with what we would consider normal. And then told me that there had been a number of principals over the years, said that it was a, quote, a revolving door of principals, each coming in with an idea of how to help the school get better, and each leaving without having really made much of an impact or a lasting impact on the school. And so I was asked this question, Mr. Constantino, what is it you're going to do that 11 other principals haven't already tried and miserably failed at, or something like that? I don't know that I have the number right, but that was the question. And it was a daunting question, I might add. I don't know that I answered it very well at that lunch, quite frankly, but it stuck in my mind. And it was the first time that I had considered that perhaps the solution to student learning outcomes and school performance was lying outside of the normal parameters that we were focusing on. And I began to read and understand a little bit more about family engagement and what family engagement did to help schools, and most specifically improve learning outcomes of those students who perhaps we have seen traditionally struggling in our schools. And ladies and gentlemen, I'll say to you that the analogy that I use is that I started pulling a thread. I was not a family engagement expert. I didn't really know that there was any research in family engagement. I just started looking for it, and when I realized that there had been years and years of studies, I remember thinking to myself, how did I get all the way to becoming a principal and no one has ever told me about the impact that this kind of work can do? And thus began a journey, quite frankly, that started a long time ago in 1995, and that journey continues today. I still am very honored to be able to crisscross this country. I just came in last night from Phoenix. Just before Phoenix, I was in the state of North Dakota. I get to see all kinds of schools and see much of our country, and we've taken our message worldwide as well. So it's a message that resonates with everybody. I think everyone that has participated in workshops and lectures and speeches comes away thinking, you know, this is something we really need to think about. And I was just telling a group of people yesterday, I might add, as an aside, someone said, why is it, Dr. Constantino, that we don't consider family engagement as important as all of the other stuff that we do in school? And I say, you know, that's an excellent question. And that question has, in some respects, kind of haunted me for a long time, because I stumbled across it, quite frankly. Nobody sent me to a professional development. I didn't learn it in college, and I was no coursework. I actually stumbled across this work. And that's where I decided, well, then I am going to make it my life's work to share this with as many people as I possibly can, because not only do I believe that it works, I've actually seen it work. 5 years into my principalship, our school had gone from a low-performing school to an extremely high-performing school. Our average daily attendance rate was almost 100%. It was in 98 point something. Our dropout rate had dropped 12 points. We became a large international baccalaureate school, one of the 11th largest international baccalaureate program in North America, the 17th largest international baccalaureate program, and by the way, very successful, 80% of our students scoring at or above the world mean. And so we saw some great successes, and people started asking me, well, Steve, what is it that you did? And I said, well, we engaged families in the educational lives of their children, and they looked at me rather puzzled, like, no, seriously, what did you do? And so I had some convincing to do to folks, and here we are. So let's get going on some ideas and some processes and some how-tos that you might take back and think about working with in your school. It really starts with this idea, this sentence that you see on your screen really was the inspiration for the last book that I wrote, Engage Every Family, 5 Simple Principles. And it's a bit of a play on words of Ron Edmonds, which I'll share with you a bit later. But it occurred to me that if we could successfully teach every child that came to our schools by ourselves without the assistance of families, then we would have already done it. We haven't. We have always had achievement gaps. We've always had reporting groups of students, and we've always struggled with not all of our students meeting the kind of academic success that we want. And as long as that occurs, the premise of my argument is, then why wouldn't you take a look at this work? Why wouldn't you embrace the concept and the notion of family engagement? So think of that as a foundation today upon which we'll build the information that we'll share with you. As I travel the country, these are all the things I'm hearing. So many schools around the country are now focused on the deeper learning agenda, being innovative, looking at personalized learning, performance assessment, project-based learning. But the biggest word that I hear as I travel is this notion of equity. everyone, and there's been much written, conferences, for example, have been devoted solely to this notion of how do we bring about equitable outcomes in schools. And one of the things, and again, this is not a seminar or a webinar on equity, but I would offer this question. With everything that we know about providing equitable outcomes, supportive teachers, student engagement, staffing, budgets, equal does not mean equitable, all of those things that we know to be true. We know that equity means giving every student what they need exactly when they need it so that they may be successful in our schools. The question I pose is, how do you propose to do that without engaging their families? And along the way in the webinar, I'm going to give you some things that I call big ideas, because I know you're all very busy people, and in a couple of days you may forget much of what we say here today. But if you could hang on to the big ideas, I think that you'll find them intriguing enough to have conversations with your staff, or at least to give you some things to think about as you look toward engaging families. How do we achieve equity without engaging families? Here, because big idea number one, families are the most influential teachers of their children. You'll notice that I didn't say families are the best teachers of their children. We don't always think and know from research that that's true, but what we do know is that families have more influence over their children's learning than we do. When I say this to teachers in workshops, they all nod their head. I said, have you ever had something undone at home in 10 minutes that you worked on for 7 hours trying to instill? And almost every teacher's head in the room will nod up and down. I said, that's that influence at work, ladies and gentlemen. How about we influence the influencers? And how about we harness that influence for the work that we're doing in our schools? Because this is a leadership seminar, I also wanted to talk about those important, essential leadership elements. And again, we could have a whole webinar on what makes a good leader, and there's lots of books and lots of conversation. But I boiled it down to really 3 ideas that I think most researchers would agree upon. And that is the disposition for leadership, the skill in being a leader, and most importantly, the vision for where the organization is going, where it needs to be, where it wants to be. I would also argue, too, from what I understand to be true, is that the most important component of leadership is one who has and can share a vision, yet what we see in the day-to-day observations of our schools is that vision is often that leadership attribute that gets put to the end of the list or put aside because of what Stephen Covey would call the tyranny of the urgent. And so the idea that I have for you today is to have you think about what is your vision, and then a sub-question, what roles do families play in the vision of your school? The picture of the gentleman that you see on the screen here is Mr. Ron Edmonds. Mr. Edmonds was both at Michigan State University and Harvard, and he is really the father of a movement that we knew of that started in the 60s and 70s called the Essential Schools movement. There were 6 correlates of essential schools. I'm going to share those correlates with you in a minute. But take a look at, and this quote is a very famous quote by Mr. Edmonds. It was written in the 1979 ASCD Journal. And he says, you know, we can, whenever and wherever we choose, successfully teach all children whose education is of interest to us. I always thought that it was interesting that he used the word interest. Again, just really acts as a catalyst for a lot of conversation and thought. We already know more than we need to do it. We really know how to do it. We need to think about how we feel about the fact that we haven't done it yet. So, and he was primarily researching the achievement gaps in those days, between Caucasian and African American students. That's what he was very concerned about. And he came up with these correlates. And you'll see that none of this, I think, is a surprise to you. What principal or what leader doesn't know, instructional leadership, clear focused mission, environments, expectations, monitoring of progress? But look at the one that's highlighted. positive homeschool relations. And that's the one that gets left behind, quite frankly. It's not one that usually gets equal billing with everything we do. And in some cases, we think we're engaging families. But that leads me to big idea number 2. We are very good in school at engaging the already engaged. We have events that are traditional to us. Sometimes we do back-to-school events. Sometimes we do math nights and reading nights and all kinds of things. And if you really started to analyze what we do, we're very good at engaging those parents that are already engaged in their children's education, not so good in engaging those that are disengaged and disenfranchised. There's a science to disengagement and disenfranchisement. We don't have enough time to talk about that today, but maybe someday I'll be invited back and we can focus on why do people become disengaged and how do you stop that and reverse that process. That's a whole conversation in itself. So you see that homeschool relations are one of the 6 correlates. Think of it, as my friend Karen Mapp always says, think of it as a cake recipe. Take one ingredient out, the cake isn't going to come out too well. So to ignore it or to do it minimally will probably lead to that plateauing that I referred to, or why can't we seem to move the needle on those areas that are difficult to us? Family engagement is very possibly your answer. Mr. Edmonds also said this in the article, and again, I don't want you to read the whole thing, but I'd like you to read what's in color. We often, and this is one of the assumptions that we make, and we're going to get to some of the assumptions about family engagement, especially about disengaged families, that are just flat out wrong. I'm going to try to burst that bubble for you today, and if nothing else, at least tell you what is true and what we know from research so that we can start to counteract some of the assumptions that are out there. But we sometimes believe that pupil performance is derived from their family background. If a student comes from a poor family, if a student comes from a family that lives in a particular part of our community, and you know what I'm talking, you know, I don't need to go through all of those things because I think you get it. We think, well, because that student is who they are, because they come from the family they come from, or they come from the area they come from, or they might come from another country. Oh, there's all kinds of things, all kinds of categories, I guess, that we have developed. We think, well, you know, then that student is going to have limited success. This is most prevalent with poor children, socioeconomically disadvantaged, and children of poverty. But what you need to understand, the first assumption I need to blow up for you is that student performance has nothing to do with their family background. It has everything to do with our response to that background. That is a very different set of circumstances, and that's why I put that one line in a different color, because that's an assumption that you as a leader, if you could do just that, if you could just make sure that everybody in your school understands that because a student comes from a particular place or a particular family, that their learning is going to be limited, blow that up. That is simply not true, and that's been proven over and over and over again. This is a quick graphic of research. You'll see the citation down in the corner. Now, Dr. Edmonds was doing his work in the early 1970s and I guess through the end of 1970. Here's a different set of research from 2010, a study of Chicago schools. And you'll notice what happens when we want classrooms and schools to improve. Look at what needs to be there. Look at what needs to be in the recipe in order for schools to be successful. You'll note the red circle. There it is again. All these years later, a completely different set of researchers in a completely different setting come almost to the same conclusions. And ladies and gentlemen, every time school improvement research is done, family and community engagement is always part of the process, is always a variable. It's always an ingredient. Leave the ingredient out, we don't get very far. So how do we achieve equitable learning? How do we help all of our students be successful? You spend a great deal of time in professional development helping teachers become better at their craft. We want reading and math teachers to use the latest information that we have. We want to help teachers in their methodology and pedagogy. I want to ask you a question. I know you can't answer this question, but I want you to consider, in the last 5 years, or however many years that you have been where you are, how much money has been devoted to the professional development of teachers and leaders to build their capacity in engaging families? My hunch is not much. And one of the ideas I'd like to leave with you today is to get you to think about this work as being as important a professional development and a professional learning and capacity building opportunity for your staff as everything else that you do. Because we are assuming, there's that word again, we're assuming that teachers have these skills. Teachers are wonderful people and they have tremendous skills. But most, not all, and I'm happy to say the number is increasing, but many programs, teacher preparation programs, do not include family engagement research. And many of our leadership programs either don't, or they give maybe a cursory review of family engagement research. Now, I'm happy to report that that's changing, but that's a big deal. That's a big piece of this process of building the capacity of our educators to not only understand this, the awareness of it, but to implement high-yield strategies that will determine better outcomes for all of our learners. I'm going to put up 2 pieces of research on this page, and again, this is not an hour, this is not a master's class where we have to look at research the whole time. But the first piece is something that I think everybody knows. The better the literacy opportunities at home, the higher levels of reading knowledge of the children in school. That's a pretty common knowledge. I don't think that there's anybody that doesn't know that. But look at the next one. Parent involvement in their child's literacy practices is a more powerful force than any other family background variable. Go back to what you just saw from Mr. Edmonds. We can overcome poverty, language, apprehension of school, all of those things that cause disengagement of families, that cause them not to be engaged at levels that can produce better results, can be overcome if we could look at ways in which we can implement practices that engage them more. I think that's pretty powerful information, and it's something that you as a leader, if you've not considered it before, I hope that you'll consider it in the future. So here's my little question, because I know everybody's sitting there, okay, Steve, you got me, I get it, I agree with you. How am I supposed to do it? Well, let me share with you a couple of ideas that may help get you on your way. First of all, if you look at this is our logic model of the 5 simple principles, and we call it a logic model because there is a process embedded into it. It is not an accident that this is drawn as a circle. It is not an accident that the arrows are pointing clockwise, and it's not an accident that things are numbered in the manner that they're numbered. Big idea number 3, family engagement is not an event, nor is it a series of events. Family engagement is a process. It is a process just like anything else in school improvement. Quick example, if I sat down with a group of 3rd grade teachers and I said, I'd like you to design a way in which more of our 3rd graders could be on reading level, the teachers would go back and what would they do? Well, I think they would determine methodology and best practice. I think they would determine curriculum. I think they would determine implementation. I think they would determine materials. I think they would implement those. They would test those. They would come back together to look at mid-course corrections. They would make sure that what they were doing was working. They would make sure that they had the very best materials. There would be a plan to capture those students who perhaps were not meeting the mark. So what I'm explaining to you is a process to improve reading levels of 3rd grade students. Nobody listening to this webinar doesn't know how to do that. Yet when I say to folks, Now I want you to come up with a plan to increase family engagement. Usually the answer I get is, oh, well, we're going to have a math night. Now think about that for a moment. Would we increase third grade reading levels by bringing all the third graders in for an hour and a half on a Wednesday night? I don't think so. So we have kind of these false expectations that we are doing things that are actually promoting family engagement, which may not be promoting family engagement at all, because we may be stuck in that cycle of engaging the already engaged. So I want you to think about family engagement as a process, and that process starts. We're gonna spend just a minute or two. We could do a 3-day workshop on this, folks, but we don't have that much time. But I'm going to touch the treetops of all of these things and show you why they are the way they are. Why does number 1 come number 1, and why is number 2 number 2? And try to build that out for you as quickly as I can and as efficiently as I can. And just a reminder too, if you have questions, there's a question box, and please let us know. Culture is a very important topic that I have been talking about for a long, long time. It is in all of the books that I've written, and it's the core, the foundation of any organization's success. What are the beliefs, the values, the assumptions, the attitudes, and the actions of people in the organization? If you believe that family engagement is important, if you value engaging with disengaged families, those two things will work in your favor. If you assume that because a family didn't come to a conference or didn't come to a meeting that they're apathetic, you're wrong. And it's possible that the assumptions that we have built up about disengaged families are now affecting our attitude about those families, and in turn those attitudes will directly impact the actions that we take in school. You and your staff, the people in your building, are in fact the culture of your school. Culture doesn't fall from the sky. It's not injected. It is the beliefs, the sum total of the beliefs, the values, assumptions, attitudes, and actions. I always say to my audiences when I work with them, I said, does your organization suffer from the terrible Tuwati disease? And they say, what? I said, Tuwati. That stands for that's the way we've always done it. That is pervasive in organizations, not just education, lots of organizations. The ones who don't do it that way, when you start looking at organizational development and improvement and you start wondering why certain places are doing better than others, it's because they have focused on this topic first. We need to know in your school what the beliefs and the values and the assumptions and the attitudes are about family engagement. And in all the work that we do, we give you the tools to actually collect that data so you as a leader have a good idea. You know, if 40% of your teachers don't think there's any value in engaging with disengaged families, you need to know that. Okay, well, that's where we start. And now we're gonna put a system into place to try to see if we can't get that number a little bit lower. So culture, knowing what we do, knowing what we believe and value, becomes very important. I love this. This comes from Simon Sinek. Start with why. If you've read the book, then you already know what I'm going to do. But this is a story that he placed in the book. The cold January day, the 43-year-old man was sworn in the executive of his country. You can read it. By his side stood the predecessor, had won a war with Germany. The new leader was Roman Catholic. And when everybody is asked, who is this story about? Everyone says, oh, it's John F. Kennedy. Has to be John F. Kennedy. There's been no other Roman Catholic president. Well, as soon as they say that, I'll say you've made a couple assumptions. First of all, it didn't say president. It said chief executive. But you also might not have all of the information, because there's one more little piece of information coming up at the bottom of your screen. It was 1933, a cold January day, not 1960. And then you realize that the story is not about John F. Kennedy at all. It's actually about Adolf Hitler. And I use this only to reinforce the notion of the danger of assumptions. When we assume that because people act or do things in a particular way, that it's because of what we think. And my advice to staff for years has been, be careful of what you think you know. How do you shift an active culture? I'm going to put all these things up at the same time. Practices changed by professional building capacity in people. Professional learning needs to be inclusive of all constituents on this topic. A workshop or an hour doesn't change anything. It might help to open the eyes and build some awareness, but there has to be some sort of leadership dedication to making this work. What matters to you as a leader will matter to employees, and it doesn't change on a dime. Culture evolves. One of the things I worry about in education is that we run looking for quick fixes. What can we do? What can we slap on our school and our classrooms tomorrow to make things better? And I think we've all learned that those quick fixes maybe make things better for a while, but they rarely allow us an opportunity to be permanently successful. And that's culture changing. We know when we change the culture, we've made a permanent shift in a change. Peter Drucker, the very famous business consultant, once said, "Culture eats change for breakfast." It's why so many times we as leaders try to institute change in an organization only to have it all but fall apart 6 months later, and by the time we start the next school year, whatever initiative we were trying is dead on the table, and we go to the next one. That's culture. That's the importance of that piece of this process. And it's not just germane to family engagement. It could be any kind of improvement that you're looking at your organization. Second is communicate and build relationships. Now, why is this second and not first? Well, let me pose to you this idea. If we don't have a culture that believes and values in engaging every family, not just the easy ones, if we don't believe and value that, then what motivation do we have to build a relationship with them? So you see, we have to have a culture in place in order to build a trusting relationship with our families. Many of our schools are very good at having welcoming environments, but we need to understand that at the root of disengagement with those families that are not connected to us is a mistrust. Something has happened, or a series of things have happened, or perhaps in their own education, their own school experiences weren't positive, and now they have transferred those to their children, or they believe that the experience that their children are going to have is going to mirror the experience that they had in school. And so we've got some work to do. We've got some relational trust to build. One of the big ideas, I think I've lost count, this might be big idea number 4, is to understand that before they will come to you, you must go to them. Continuing to have events and hoping that disengaged people will attend, or continuing to schedule conferences in a particular way and hoping that more parents will come, you're probably going to end up being disappointed. I often tell, I just worked with a group of counselors the other day, and I said, you know, the best strategy in improving parent engagement in conferences is to call the family prior to the conference and ask them what they want to know. We often design conferences based on what we want to communicate to families. Well, turn it around. Build a conference based on what families would like to know about their child, and then throw in a few things that they need to know that they might not understand, but engage them. When we engage somebody with something, we know that it's meaningful and relevant to them. The easiest way to make it meaningful to them is saying, we're so happy that you're coming to a conference. What 2 or 3 things would you like us to know? Because we want to be prepared to make sure that we answer those questions for you. You might be surprised. We've seen tremendous results in schools really improving conference attendance just with that one little idea of engaging families in it. So, and because we're probably primarily talking to elementary schools, I want to share with you the weekly folder. When my son was in elementary school, he had a weekly folder. I seem to recall that it was on Wednesdays, and the folder was yellow, as I remember. And in the folder, there were examples of things that he had done in school that week. There might be a little spelling quiz that he took, or maybe he was learning his colors and he had to draw the roof green and the front door red, or maybe there was something else that he had done in class that the teacher wanted us to see. And then there was always a piece of paper in there that we had to sign to say that we had received the information, and the folder and that signature had to go back the next day. Well, when I explain that process, many of my elementary friends kind of nod their head and say, yeah, that's kind of how we do it. And here's the question I pose. How do you engage someone in something that has already occurred? Think about that for a moment. How do you engage someone in something that has already occurred? The answer is you don't. And I often suggest that you put into the folder things that will happen in school and give families ideas about how they might be able to support what will be happening in school. And instead of a signature, perhaps you can say, you know, this week in school we studied dinosaurs or the prehistoric era or whatever. That's kind of a, not the greatest example, but an example. Ask your child what they know about dinosaurs. Write that down, send that in. Let's see, what have we checked off? Checking for understanding, formative assessment, family engagement, teacher immediate feedback. All of those things can happen by changing the way we do things, which leads me to the next big idea. Family engagement is not about doing more. It's about doing what we already do differently. I'm not kooky enough to come into schools and districts around the country and tell teachers, I've got a great idea for you, and it's only going to take you 10 more hours a week. They're going to, thanks for coming, Steve, and they're going to get up and they're going to walk out. I've never professed that it was about more. It's always about taking a hard look at what we're doing it differently, understanding the roots of engagement, understanding the processes in place in engagement, and moving forward. Once we have established a relationship with families based on a culture that embraces the concept, now you see why number one is number one and number two is number two. Now we can begin to promote their efficacy with things like the folder. Now we can start to engage them. We talk a lot about teacher efficacy. A lot is being written and done. A lot of workshops about teacher efficacy. Lots about student engagement. Now that we're talking about student-centered learning and student agency, student efficacy has kind of skyrocketed in research and the things that people are thinking about. I don't hear people talking about family efficacy, though. And I want you to note that last bullet that says invisible engagement, because that's kind of a big idea. Remember that I said that family engagement is not an event or a series of events. Actually, the best kind of family engagement might be engagement that you never see. You've built a platform to allow it to occur, but what you see is the evidence of it in your classrooms. What you see is a more positive relationship, more positive information coming from home. What you get is the information about what the child is doing. You see more homework. You see better attendance. You see better attitudes. You see even better behaviors in many of our students. All of that comes from this notion of building efficacy, which must be based on a relationship of trust, which starts with a culture that believes that by doing it, we will be a better organization. Then and only then can we engage families in decision-making, and this is where decision-making goes wrong, because when we don't have good relationships or we've not gone through a process of examining our organization and perhaps redesigning some work, suddenly we thrust families into helping us make decisions, and often that may not end up very well for us. We either get a very small number of families or perhaps we get pushback on decisions and policies that are made. And then looking at policies and procedures and practices that you have in your school. I've been in many schools that have a policy, they say, that says if a parent wants to visit a child's classroom, they need to give the teacher 24-hour notice. And I often ask a simple question when they tell me that's their policy. I ask why. And it's rarely anybody that can give me an answer, which is the interesting part. They say, well, that's just the way we do it. I say, okay, why do you do that? What is it you're going to do in 24 hours? And do you think that by having a 24-hour policy, are you maybe subconsciously trying to discourage or dissuade families from visiting the school? And don't you think that there might be better relationships and better understanding if they were open to being in school, perhaps on times when we didn't dictate? You know, when we have a back-to-school night or a math night, we're dictating the engagement. Come Tuesday night from 6:30 to 9, some 6:30 to 8. Ann Henderson, another famous, really great person and family engagement person, used to say, she called that the come if we call you school. You are more than welcome to be in our school, but you're only welcome to be here when we say you can be here. The rest of the time, we prefer you you not be here, and if you do want to come here, you're going to need an appointment first. Well, I'm not judging those practices. I'm just suggesting that those are the kinds of things that we as educators take a look at when we're designing family engagement. And lastly, conceptualizing engagement for the greater community. The vast majority of emails and correspondences that I get from principals and leaders around the country are about, Steve, how do we promote more community engagement? How do we get more people in engagement, engaged with our schools? And I often ask them, say, well, what is it you want them engaged in? Well, with our schools and with our kids. Okay, in what? Well, to support our schools. Okay, support how? So you need to drill down. We call that conceptualized engagement. What is it we specifically want? But we can't get community engagement, which is at the end of the cycle, unless we have gone all the way through the process of engaging the families of the children that we serve as well. I used to often say to my staff as a superintendent that we have two kinds of customers in our community. We have customers who pay for our services and use them, and we have customers who pay for our services and don't. So if you are a taxpayer and you send your child to my school, you are a level 1 customer. But many people in the community pay taxes for schools and don't use the product. Well, we have to get those that use our services, engaged before we are going to have great success in engaging those that perhaps don't use our services. So I'm really coming to the end and hoping that I have given you some food for thought on this topic, because family engagement is far more than we tend to think about it. We tend to fear family engagement. When I talk with educators about engaging families, if I say the words home visits, I strike fear in the hearts of educators. But I think it's important that we explore those fears. I think it's important that we determine why we think what we think. Why do we believe what we believe? One of the tips I give to people all the time is, when you're in a leadership position and you are in the human being business, and that's the business that we're in, now there's things that are going to go wrong, and there are people that are going to be upset with us. And one of the hardest things to do, and I know this because I've worked at this my whole career, is to, when someone is cross with you and someone's upset with you and they're angry with you, to try to remember that there's something that's driving that anger, and it's usually fear. And if we can find out what families are scared of, and usually they're worried that their child won't be successful. They're worried that their child will fall behind. They understand that education, especially disengaged families, disenfranchised families, they understand that education is the ticket. And so they become scared that it might slip away from them, and that manifests itself usually as anger toward grades, or anger toward policies, or anger toward discipline. And then we become defensive. I've often said disengaged families interpret defensiveness as guilt. Let me say that again. Disengaged families interpret defensiveness as guilt. So those are the kinds of things that we as leaders need to think about, that we have to infuse into the culture of our school. So the big ideas: engaging the already engaged. Family engagement is not about more, it's just about different. Anger is usually a mask for fear. Before they come to us, we must come to them. We must go to them. All of those ideas are embedded in this process of family engagement. And my goal today was to at least begin to inspire you to change not your vision of where you want your school to be, but the role that families might play in helping you get there, and understanding that even though we have tremendous success with a large number of our families, there is always a percentage of families who are disengaged. And what kind of a focus are we placing on them? When we have big events at school, I can remember having back to school nights and thinking how positive they were up until I started figuring out who was actually there. When I asked special education teachers how many families had come and visited them, and they said none. When I asked teachers of English language learners, and they said, no, our families would never come to this. That's when I started realizing that something had to be different, that we had to take a different approach to help our students be more successful. You have a vision statement in your school, I'm sure. We had a vision statement in many of the districts that I've worked in over my career, and they're always very, very good, but they're always pretty long and pretty involved. You know, we're going to prepare students for the 21st century global society by making them good thinkers and problem solvers, and it goes on and on and on and on. And if you asked, you know, someone what the vision statement was, they probably couldn't teach you. This was the vision statement that we used many years ago at our school. Every family, every teacher, every child, every day. It told you what we're about. It told you what we believed. It told you everything about us that you needed to know. And the beauty of it is everybody could remember it. And it worked really well on a button. I can remember the kids making buttons and giving them to everybody. And it just was a reinforced, and it became a core value. And when you get a core value in your organization, you then start to see that culture change happen. The last idea that I'll share with you and then take some questions is those three ideas at the top of the screen. Children need to do well, to be safe, and to feel love. Those are things that I've carried with me for a long, long time as a leader. We understand that every family desires that their children exceed them in their quality of life, and that often drives the level of engagement or disengagement. And I also know that we can make it happen. We've replicated these programs in hundreds of schools around the country, and really have looked at how family engagement can truly support the kinds of work that you're trying to do in your schools. And I don't know who's on the call today, but you represent urban schools and rural schools and suburban schools and large schools and small schools and all kinds of schools. And these are general principles. These are universal principles that, when applied, can bring about change. It doesn't matter that you're urban. I often get questions, well, what about an urban school? Or what about a school that is majority minority? Or what about this? Or what about that? I mean, I've done work with schools that are 100% free and reduced lunch. I've done work with schools that are working with majority Native Americans. There's no difference, because the process is the process, and it can overlay itself on any organization. So we've got about 12 minutes left, and I see a question has come up, and the question is, you mentioned that parents won't come to a school until we go to them. Please provide a few examples of types of community places that resulted in quality turnout. Well, the first that's a great question. The first thing I'll say to you is that what I'm saying there is that you need to start wrapping your head around the idea of home visits to families who are disengaged. There's a process to home visits. I wouldn't just go out and do it without learning about it, and because there is a way to do it, and there's a way not to do it, quite frankly, that can perhaps drive even further disengagement. But also, so that's part of the answer. Part of the answer is looking at working with families individually, visiting them at home. But I've also encouraged school districts to use the community agencies, and you saw earlier when we talked about communities, you saw community asset mapping. Let me tell you a story really quickly about a school district that did just that. This school district, and I won't even tell you what it is or where it is, it was a suburban school district, about 5,000 kids, K through 12. Pretty average district, you know, not urban, not rural, suburban. They were having a heck of a time getting families to come to parent conferences. They said their average rate of attendance to parent conferences at the elementary schools was 29%. And I said, well, let's take a look at, let's find out who's coming. Well, it turned out that they had a significant population of people from a particular country. Again, doesn't matter which country. It just mattered that a lot of the families that were not participating were not families that originated in the United States. They have immigrated here from this particular country. And so I said to them, I said, well, why don't we talk to the leader of the local church to see what they might be able to offer? And so the school district leadership, the school leadership went and talked with the leaders of the church, explained the problem, and said that really all we're trying to do is connect with families so that we can give them information, help their children, and learn about them. And they engaged the church in the process. When they did, the leader of the church at the next weekend service said, you know, this is what the school did. He introduced the school people and said that the church was going to be hosting the next set of conferences, and that he encouraged all of the families to sign up and come to the church, and the school was moving the conferences from the school to the church. And they went from a 29% rate of attendance to a 70% rate of attendance by doing one thing. So there's a couple of ideas that answers that question. Can you give a strategy? The second question I see here is, can you give a strategy dealing with family engagement of ESL students? Well, let me reiterate what I just said, and that is, first, because I think I can, but that the family engagement process, think of it as an overlay that works with all families. And again, in a very short webinar experience, we've not been able to dig too deeply into these things. But when you understand your culture, when you understand building relationships, most of the time with families for whom English is not a first language, we know this. We know that family engagement is a foreign concept to them. In many countries outside of the United States, there just is no such thing as family engagement. It's not a term that they just understand. And so they come to the United States and suddenly they're expected to become engaged and involved and do all these things. And it's overwhelming to them. And because of the language barriers, and in certain cases now, you know, society being the way it is, there's a lot of fear, a lot of trepidation out there. So as a result, no, they're not going to do it. Well, what we recommend, and there are some specific researchers that have studied some specific things about certain cultures, Latino being one of them, to suggest that what you can do is when you visit with the family, whether that's at home or at a neutral site, the local library or the Walmart meeting room or the basement of the church or a community center in an apartment complex, all of those kinds of places are in every organization. The first time we talk to those families, we don't talk to them about school. We don't talk to them about expectations, their expectations. We don't talk to them about grading policies and syllabi and all of those things. The first conversation simply should be about, tell me about your culture. Tell me about your family. In most cases, families from other countries need to know that we value their culture. And the best piece of advice that I could give you there is to design systems that do that first. There's plenty of time later to talk about school, talk about their country, find out why they came to the United States. I think one of the most heart-wrenching stories is a father who said to me one time that he brought his family one by one to the United States because he didn't want them murdered. It was an extremely powerful statement that was made. And so just sitting and talking and finding out what do you like to eat, and how is America different from your country, and what are your hopes, and what would you like to know? I think when we embrace a culture and embrace a person and build a relationship with that person, well, then we can start to infuse those academic things that we need. We can start to at least have a better platform to begin to explain what we're trying to do in terms of working with children, and especially working with children for whom English is not a first language, who are going through perhaps a different process in school than others. So there's a couple of ideas for you. I don't see any other questions.
Actually, Steve, I have a question. I'm just curious what your advice would be to principals, especially early career principals, in terms of what their role and how they can facilitate more family engagement, and also at the same time kind of protect those teachers when there's some parents where they're very engaged, you know, and they're You
The
know,
overly
the other
engaged.
extreme where, there's certain families that are just always there and, you can't, so what would your advice be for new principals on that?
I've often had people ask me, when is your book coming out about the overly engaged? And I said, well, someday I might write about that because that's a different set of circumstances. But we understand that the percentage of disengaged is sometimes a little bit bigger. I think that it's important to know that what drives families, regardless of how they behave, and some of them are over the top. Some of them are at school every day or maybe all day or 10 times a day, or who question every assignment or who need to know everything up front. I get that. You have to remember that all of that behavior is driven by some sort of fear. Fear that their child will fall behind, fear that their child won't be competitive, fear that their child won't go to college, fear that their child, fill in the blank. A lot of that is driven by fear. And I would be very careful in the words that I use when working with my staff. And again, this is a common thing that we think of in schools where we say, well, it's my job to protect the staff. I don't like the word protect because the word protect begins to build a barrier, and we don't need another one. What I want to do is educate my staff as to why things occur and then give them the skills and the tools and the capacity to work with that. We don't spend any time giving professional development. For example, when I ask teachers about phone calls, teachers say, I'd love to call the parents, but, I get through 3 parents and the third one gets on the phone and they want to keep me on the phone for 25 minutes. That's absolutely true. And so parents say, or they get somebody that's just mad and they start yelling at them. And so teachers say, well, if that's making phone calls, I don't want to do it. Well, there's actually a process that you can teach people to solve those issues. There's basic communication techniques to do that. I would encourage all of our principals, whether it's your first day or your 30th year, to build the capacity of your staff, but most importantly, to make sure that family engagement is part of the vision. Make sure that that this is who we are. When I would interview teachers for positions in my school, I would say, this is what we believe, this is who we are, and this is how we work with families. And I understand that everybody's not comfortable with that, but I need you to understand that if you want to work here, this is what we want, this is what we're going to help you do. We're going to build your capacity, we're going to support you, but we expect that these things are going to occur. If that really troubles you, perhaps this is not the school you should work at. Those are really holding yourself to cultural convictions and really holding yourself to a set of values that will ultimately speak to this work. So consider supporting your staff. Consider training and building their capacities so that when the overly engaged come to us or the disengaged are out there, that teachers, because the minute we say the word protect, now all of a sudden we put this thought in the mind, there must be something to be scared of. And that's where the disengagement starts. If we had more time, we could go into that. But I would encourage you to turn the conversation around into this is how can we help overly engaged families be less engaged, and how can we help less engaged families be more engaged? That would be my thinking on that.
Great, thank you.
On behalf of NAESP, Steve, we would like to thank you for all this information that you shared today. Dr. Constantino's information is on the screen, where you can get him on Twitter or email him. But again, thank you, Honor, for hosting us here today, as well as Dr. Constantino, our Executive Director, Dr. Franks, as well as our Associate Executive Director of Professional Learning, Gail Morgan. My name again is Aaron Lurie. I'm the Director of Professional Learning, and we'll see you at the next session of our Wednesday webinar, which will be next month. Thanks again. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.